a £6 million fortress of iron. 200 workers sleeping in the middle of a violent Atlantic storm. And a silent, odorless killer creeping through the vents that not a single multi-million-dollar sensor could detect. That a Titan oil rig was 5 minutes away from becoming a pillar of fire, until a scruffy terrier named Jax tasted something in the air that the humans were blind to. This is the story of the dog who sensed the invisible explosion. The Titan's shadow, the dog who sensed the invisible explosion. Chapter 1: The Sleeping Giant. The Titan was an offshore oil rig that stood like a skeletal god in the middle of the North Atlantic. A £6 million fortress of iron, steel, and fire, it hummed with the constant, bone-shaking vibration of the deep-sea drills. 200 workers lived within its metal ribs, separated from the freezing, hungry ocean by only a few inches of reinforced plating. To the crew, the rig was a symbol of human dominance over nature, a place where technology conquered the abyss. On this particular night, a violent storm was brewing on the horizon, turning the sea into a churning cauldron of black ink. The wind shrieked through the derrick's latticework, but inside the living quarters, the atmosphere was thick with exhaustion and the smell of industrial grease. The men and women of the night shift moved like ghosts, their eyes heavy, trusting entirely in the Titan's multi-million-dollar safety systems to keep them breathing. Hidden 30 feet below the main deck, in a forest of high-pressure pipes, a silent killer was awakening. A microscopic fracture, caused by years of saltwater corrosion, had finally given way. It was a hairline crack, invisible to the naked eye, but it was leaking high-pressure methane gas into the secondary ventilation shafts. The leak was silent, a ghostly hiss that was easily drowned out by the roar of the Atlantic waves hitting the rig's massive legs. Methane is a patient assassin. It has no color, no taste, and no smell. It began to fill the lower service tunnels, displacing the oxygen and creating a volatile cloud that grew larger with every passing second. Because the rig was battered by constant sea spray, the electronic noses, the gas sensors, had become coated in a thick crust of salt and grime. The very sensors designed to save the crew were now blind and deaf to the danger. As the gas cloud expanded, it began to drift toward the electrical substation, where thousands of volts of electricity pulsed through the cables. The rig was a giant tinderbox, and the fuel was pouring in. The crew continued their work, some drinking coffee, others checking gauges that falsely reported everything was in the green. They were standing on the edge of a volcano, unaware that the fuse had already been lit. The Titan was no longer a fortress, it was a ticking time bomb. The sheer scale of the potential disaster was unfathomable, a blast that would be seen from space, leaving nothing but a burning oil slick on the water. In the command center, the screens flickered with steady, rhythmic pulses, completely oblivious to the catastrophe that was now only minutes away. The sleeping giant was about to be consumed by its own breath. Chapter 2: The Taste of Danger. In the corner of the crew's galley, a scruffy, amber-eyed terrier mix named Jax lay on a tattered rug. Jax wasn't a pedigree, and he didn't have a job title, but he was the soul of the rig. He had been found as a pup on a supply boat and had grown up in the vibration of the turbines. While the humans relied on digital readouts, Jax experienced the rig through a complex tapestry of scents and subtle shifts in air pressure. Suddenly, Jax's head snapped up. His ears, usually flopped over in sleep, stood at sharp attention. He didn't hear a sound, but he felt a strange, metallic weight in the air. To a dog's hypersensitive olfactory system, methane doesn't just smell, it changes the chemistry of the environment. Jax tasted a bitter, chemical tang on the back of his tongue, a sign that the very air he breathed was becoming toxic. He stood up, his claws clicking nervously on the diamond plate steel floor. He paced in a tight circle, his tail tucked low, a low whine vibrating in his chest. The humans around him were laughing, watching a movie on a small television, completely blind to the invisible fog creeping through the floor vents. Jax could see the air shimmering slightly in the dim light, a distortion caused by the gas density that the human eye simply couldn't register. Jax ran to the door of the galley, scratching at the heavy metal frame until his paws bled. He needed to get to the source, he needed to warn the alpha of the pack. His instincts, honed by 1,000 generations of wolves who guarded the den, were screaming that the den was no longer safe. The air was becoming a predator, and Jax was the only one who knew how to fight it. He burst through the door as a worker entered, bolting down the narrow, dimly lit corridors. He ignored the shouts of "Hey, slow down, mutt, and get that dog under control." Jax wasn't playing, he was hunting a killer that had no body. Every breath he took felt heavier, the oxygen levels in the lower hallways beginning to dip as the methane pushed the life-giving air aside. Jax reached the central hub where the main ventilation fans were located. He saw that the giant blades were spinning, but they were merely circulating the gas, spreading the danger into every corner of the rig. He stood before the ventilation grate, his fur standing on end, barking with a frantic, desperate ferocity. He was a small dog standing against a 6 million pound machine, trying to shout down a disaster that had already begun. Chapter 3: The Broken Alarm. Jax sprinted toward the bridge, the high-tech heart of the rig where the shift supervisor, a man named Miller, was monitoring the night's progress. Jax burst through the doors, sliding across the polished floor, barking until his voice was a ragged, painful rasp. He lunged at Miller, tugging on the man's heavy work trousers, trying to pull him toward the service stairs that led to the pump rooms. "Jax, not now. I'm busy," Miller snapped, frustrated by the distraction during a difficult storm watch. He pushed the dog away, but Jax came back even harder, nipping at Miller's boots and then running toward the door, looking back with eyes that were wide with an almost human pleading. To Miller, it was just a dog acting out because of the thunder outside. He had no idea the dog was trying to save his life. The sensors on Miller's desk remained steady, their green lights mocking the urgency in the dog's eyes. The salt crust on the external intakes had created a dead zone, a pocket of air where the sensors couldn't detect the rising methane levels. Miller checked the computer, systems normal, it read. He looked back at Jax and sighed, "Go back to the galley, boy. It's just a storm." Jax stopped barking. He realized that the human language of screens and buttons was deaf to the truth. He looked at the technician at the secondary console, who was reaching for a light switch to illuminate the lower deck camera. Jax knew that the simple act of flipping that switch could create the spark that would end everything. The invisible killer was now thick enough that even a static discharge could trigger the end. In a final attempt, Jax jumped onto the console, his paws hitting keys and scrambling the display. "Hey! Get off there," the technician yelled, shoving Jax to the floor. The dog landed hard, but he didn't give up. If the humans wouldn't go to the danger, he would have to go to the danger himself. He turned and bolted back into the service tunnels, disappearing into the dark, echoing bowels of the rig. He descended the steep, iron ladders, his heart hammering against his ribs. The air down here was a thick, suffocating soup. His vision began to blur, and his legs felt heavy, but the scent of the leak was now a roar in his nose. He was heading for Sector 4, the deepest part of the rig, where the primary gas line met the distribution hub. He was a hero in a world that didn't even know it needed one. Chapter 4: The Hero's Choice. The pump room in Sector 4 was a nightmare of hissing steam and shadows. Here, the gas was so thick that Jax could feel it clinging to his fur like oily dew. He found the fracture, a jagged slit in a massive pipe that was spewing methane with a low, sinister whistle. Near the pipe was a large, manual lever connected to a fire curtain, a massive, 10-ton sheet of solid lead and steel designed to seal off the sector in case of a blowout. The curtain was held up by a single, gravity-weighted release pin. If the pin was pulled, the curtain would slam down, isolating the gas leak from the rest of the rig's electrical systems. But the pin was made of heavy iron, designed to be pulled by a human hand, and it was located 5 feet above the deck. Jack stood beneath it, his small body shivering from the cold and the toxic fumes. He jumped. He missed. He jumped again, his claws scraping against the cold iron of the release mechanism. Every second he spent in the room, he was inhaling the poison. His lungs felt like they were on fire, and his head was spinning. He knew that if he fainted now, he would never wake up, and the 200 people sleeping above him would vanish in a ball of fire before the sun rose. Jax looked around the room and spotted a stack of wooden crates used for tool storage. Using the last of his strength, he dragged a crate toward the lever, his muscles screaming with the effort. He climbed onto the crate, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He was high enough now. He could see the pin, coated in a thin layer of grease, just inches from his muzzle. He didn't use his paws this time. He opened his mouth and clamped his teeth onto the iron ring of the release pin. The taste was bitter and cold, but he didn't let go. He threw his entire 70-pound weight backward, falling off the crate and hanging in midair, using his gravity as a final, desperate tool. The pin groaned, the metal-on-metal friction screaming in the small room. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Jax hung there, his vision fading to black, his jaw locked in a grip of pure iron will. Then, with a sudden, violent thud, the pin gave way. Jax fell to the floor, the heavy iron ring still in his mouth, as the massive fire curtain began its descent. He had made his choice, he had traded his safety for the lives of the pack. Chapter 5: The Spark. At that exact moment, 2 decks above, the technician finally reached the light switch he had been reaching for all night. "I can't see anything on the Sector 4 camera," he muttered to Miller. "The sensor must be out. I'm going to flip the auxiliary floodlights." He flicked the switch. A tiny, blue spark jumped inside the electrical housing, a spark that, seconds earlier, would have found a path through the ventilation ducts and into the methane cloud. But the fire curtain had already fallen. With a sound like a guillotine hitting wood, the 10-ton steel sheet slammed into its floor groove, creating an airtight seal. The spark ignited the tiny amount of gas that had leaked into the upper hallway, creating a sharp whump and a small flash of fire that blew out a single light fixture. The rig shuddered slightly, but the massive explosion, the one that would have torn that Titan apart, never happened. The alarms finally screamed into life as the pressure sensors detected the sudden drop in Sector 4. Miller stared at the screen in horror as the gas warning lights finally turned red. "Sector 4 has been sealed," Sergei shouted. "The fire curtain tripped." "How?" "Nobody is down there." Miller felt a cold chill run down his spine. He remembered the dog tugging on his trousers, the desperate barks, and the way Jax had looked at the door. "The dog," Miller whispered, his voice trembling. "He's still down there." He grabbed an emergency oxygen mask and bolted for the service stairs, his heart filled with a sickening guilt. He ran through the corridors, passing the small scorch mark where the spark had ignited the air, realizing just how close they had come to total annihilation. He reached the top of the fire curtain and hammered on the steel. The air on the safe side was clear, but he knew the air on Jax's side was a tomb. Using the emergency manual crank, Miller and 3 other men fought to raise the curtain just enough for a man to crawl under. The heat radiating from the other side was intense, the air smelling of ozone and sulfur. Miller crawled through the gap with a flashlight, his beam cutting through the thick, swirling fog of gas. He found Jax lying near the crates, the iron release pin still tucked under his chin. The dog's chest wasn't moving. Miller scooped the scruffy terrier into his arms, tears blurring his vision as he scrambled back under the curtain. "I've got him! I've got him!" he yelled to the crew. They hurried back to the medical bay, the entire rig now silent, the storm outside seeming small compared to the miracle that had just occurred. Chapter 6: The Morning After. When the sun finally broke through the storm clouds the next morning, it revealed a sea that was calm and blue, showing no sign of the disaster that almost was. The Titan was still standing, its turbines humming their steady, rhythmic song. In the medical bay, Jax lay under an oxygen tent, his amber eyes finally fluttering open as Miller sat by his side, refusing to leave for even a second. The news of what happened spread through the rig like a wildfire. 200 workers, men and women who usually prided themselves on their toughness, lined up outside the infirmary just to catch a glimpse of the small dog. They knew that the only reason they were seeing the sunrise was because a creature who didn't even have a voice had chosen to use his life as a shield for theirs. The oil company tried to keep the story quiet, but the crew wouldn't let them. They demanded that Jax be given a permanent place on the rig, with his own safety officer badge and a custom-made life vest. Today, Jax is a legend of the Atlantic. He doesn't sleep in the galley anymore, he has his own bed in the command center, right next to Miller's chair, where he can keep an eye on the sensors that he once had to ignore. They eventually replaced all the sensors on the Titan with a new, salt-resistant model, but the crew knows better than to trust the green lights alone. Every night, before his shift ends, Miller looks down at the scruffy dog at his feet and asks, "How's the air, Jax?" And Jax, with a wag of his tail and a sharp, confident bark, lets them know that the pack is safe for another night. The Titan still stands as a testament to human engineering, but to those who live on it, it is a testament to something much older. It is a reminder that in our world of cold steel and high-pressure valves, the most powerful safety device is the ancient, unbreakable bond between a dog and his humans. Jax is more than a mascot, he is the Titan's shadow, the guardian who sees the invisible and hears the silent. As the video ends, think of the protectors in your own life, the ones who watch over you when you're too busy to notice. Every hero has a story, and some of the greatest heroes don't even have a name. If Jax's bravery reminded you of the silent guardians in your world, hit that like button. We tell these stories so that heroes like Jax are never forgotten. The greatest dangers are the ones we cannot see. But the greatest heroes are the ones who see them for us. Smash that like button to honor Jax and every animal hero who watches over us. Subscribe to Paws that saved lives. We bring the stories of the voiceless to life every single week. Comment Titan below if you believe animals have a sixth sense for danger.